Hit the record. Great. Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Michael Ventura. Thanks, Michael, for joining me for this discussion about empathy.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me.
So I thought I'd start off by giving a little introduction, a little bit of what I know about you. You're a founder and chief executive officer of Rosa, which is a strategy and design company. And your company, I mean, it's pretty impressive. You know, all the companies you work for, you know, big design for, like Fortune 100 companies, GE, Pantone, Nike. So a lot of the really big companies as well as startups. And the reason we're talking is you just came out with this new book, Applied Empathy, the New Language of Leadership. So we want to talk about that. And so from reading the book, what I see, you know, sort of a synopsis is that you've really placed empathy at the core of your personal values as well as your company's values. And that I think in the book you say problem solving with empathy is one of your core personal skills. So do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that the idea of solving problems with empathy has really kind of evolved as we've grown the business, as Sub Rosa has evolved. We started to discover that the best way to solve a problem is to make sure you have all the right inputs, right? If you're solving a problem in a vacuum or by yourself, you can only think about it from one angle. So part of what we've tried to do is build a practice that uses empathy to get out into the world, talk with different people, understand their perspectives, understand where they're coming from, and then use those inputs to develop the most well-rounded solution.
Okay, so what your company is using what you call applied empathy, so it's also the name of your book. Yeah. So that's kind of like your methodology, and that you apply to problem solving. And so it's really applying this methodology to businesses, to, you know, your own business, and just kind of problem solving in general. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that it is. The methodology was really designed to not just help us solve problems, but also to train and empower our clients so that they can solve their own problems as well.
Okay, so empathy is like the core of what you're doing and sort of your value systems, and it's also mine. So I've kind of dedicated my life. So I feel to this topic. You know, I've been working on it for about 10 years and interviewing people and really seeing how do we build a culture of empathy. And so I feel a real resonance because it seems like you really kind of dedicated your self to this. But one of the problems that I find, you know, coming up with, you know, talking about empathy is it seems to be a lot of different definitions. You know, what are people talking about? And so it seems to be good to kind of start with, you know, getting a little bit of clarity about, you know, what do you mean by empathy?
Sure. Yeah. For me, it is as simple as the word understanding. It is really just making an effort to shift your own perspective into a different one and understand the situation from someone else's point of view.
Okay, so let me share what my understanding of empathy is, so we can kind of, you know, have sort of a similar language. So for me, empathy is about feeling into someone's experience. So as you and I sit here, you're seeing my hands kind of wave around, so you can kind of feel into the energy, you know, that maybe I have, and then I can see, you know, you're kind of nodding. I can get a sense of, you know, your presence. So I can feel into your experience, and you're feeling into my experience. Sitting here, I can feel into my own experience of, oh, I'm feeling a little excited. I feel a sort of a sense of spaciousness. I feel sort of a curiosity in my body. So I'm sort of feeling into my body and feeling into my experience, which I would call self-empathy, and then feeling into your experience. So that's sort of the core of, you know, the first step for what I'm calling empathy. And the second part is what I see really, what you're really focusing on is sort of perspective taking or sort of an imaginative empathy. Like you're taking different roles, standing in different roles and different positions and looking at a problem, at a situation from those different perspectives and sort of feeling into that problem from multiple angles. So it's sort of like building on this core feeling into, but feeling into from different perspectives.
That's right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the more diverse places you can, to use your phrase, the more diverse places you can feel into from, the more well-rounded as a leader, as a communicator, as a problem solver you can be.
Yeah. And for me, I'm calling that imaginative empathy. Like the academics, they'll call it cognitive empathy, which I hate that term, cognitive empathy. It sounds so dry. And then sometimes they'll say perspective taking. It still sounds kind of dry, but imagining yourself in different roles sounds kind of more creative. And
for sure. And but it definitely takes imagination to sometimes gain some of those perspectives. Some of them come really naturally to us, right? Some perspectives we know because they're similar to ours, or they're similar to someone else we know well. But when we are trying to put ourselves into the minds or the shoes of someone who is very far from our own perspective, it does take some work. It takes some imagining in order to get there sometimes.
Yep. So so I think like we both see that empathy is sort of a gateway to problem solving. Does that?
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah. So, and it's like, there's sort of personal problems, but also social problems. When Barack Obama was running for office in his early days, he used to talk about an empathy deficit in the country. And I would say we still have that empathy deficit in the country and the world. So we have this, kind of a cultural, I would say a deficit of empathy. And for me, my real question is how might we, build a culture of empathy, really transform society to be really kind of built on empathy. I just wonder, how does that resonate with you?
Well, certainly have a deficit. I would agree with that. Probably more now than in the Obama administration. The way I think about how you would train that or how that would become part of it is the way I often talk about this when I go into groups and people hear the word empathy, their immediate reaction is sometimes that empathy means being nice. And I'm quick to sort of debunk that, because I don't think empathy means being nice at all. But with empathy, it does often influence the way you act, and often can make you act nicer, because you can see how your actions are going to affect others around you. In terms of the way to bring it into society, it's interesting, because while it's not something that is taught formally in grade school or anything like that, it is an innate skill I believe everybody has. I don't think it's a gift that some people have and other people don't. I think some people have more of it for sure, but that everyone has the capacity to do this sort of work. It's just a matter of training the muscle, right, and working the muscle, because this is like any muscle, it needs to be practiced, otherwise it will atrophy. So if you don't get into the routine of using empathy in whatever way works for you and your life and your job or whatever it is, then that muscle isn't going to be as strong as others.
Mm-hmm. So you're seeing the metaphor of muscles, empathy being like the muscle. We all have muscles. We all have this built-in muscle, but it's developed to varying degrees. And then you're seeing that we need to kind of build that muscle. And how do we go about doing that? Yeah,
exactly right. And I think that one of the ways to build it that's probably been the best for us has just been ritualizing it and making it a part of our practice, making sure that it shows up when we are in a kickoff with a client, when we are doing our research in the field, when and that we're constantly checking ourselves and making sure that we're using empathy effectively.
So when you're, as a company, you're going into another organization and you're using empathy to problem solve for them, is it? Do you build like cultures of empathy within the company? Is like train the company or the organization to kind of to strengthen their empathy muscles?
Yeah, we do. So one of our clients right now, for example, is a hospitality company. So they own, they're a big hotel brand, and they actually own many brands in the hotel world. And they are very interested in building a culture of empathy on their internal team, because as you might imagine, a hospitality business has a lot of, empathy has a lot of relevance for a hospitality business. And so we're helping them right now think through ways that they can run meetings differently, the ways they can use certain frameworks that have been mentioned in the book and some of the other ones that we've developed, so that they become part of the thinking and designing process of the organization.
So we're really looking at how do we, that's kind of like creating a culture of empathy in an organization. I'm also looking at how do we create a culture of empathy like in the whole country. How do we kind of redesign the whole country so empathy becomes a primary social value, and it again becomes kind of like a tool, a way of being to really address all the different social issues. If you kind of looked at that kind of the big social kind of aspect of building a culture of empathy like in the United States? Or
Sure. I mean, I think for us, the reason why it has sort of, I guess a better way of saying that is, working with corporations, we have the opportunity to influence a lot of the broader culture just by virtue of sheer numbers. When you're working with a company like Citibank, who has almost 400,000 employees, you can impact a great cross section of humanity fairly quickly. It scales pretty fast. But then also, if you think about a company like sticking with a bank, right? All of the people in which that bank interacts with, so everyone who banks with Citibank, everyone who goes into a bank branch and talks to a teller or everything like that, hopefully they all become emissaries and messengers for that work as well. So on the corporate side, I do think that is a path to influencing society as a whole. We've done some work in the public sector as well, though, in order to help either via the United Nations, who we worked with for a while, or the Obama administration that we worked with for a while as well, particularly around social issues and indigenous rights and resources, and helping as many people as we could expose to those issues become aware of the challenges, and ultimately bring empathy into their thought process about how to work with those communities.
So what I'm kind of understanding there is that by influencing a corporation, building a culture of empathy there, that it has sort of ripple effects into the culture at large. So you're sort of doing larger cultural transformation by transforming kind of individual organizations as a starting point.
Yeah, for us, I mean, that's the easiest way for us to do it, because those are our clients, right? I mean, I know that there are educators working at the grade school and high school and university level doing this sort of work too. It just doesn't overlap our world as much. Though we do teach this work in a couple universities, it is not, it's not our primary focus.
Okay, and then your book, Applied Empathy, would be sort of a guide for how to do that within a company, for example, kind of, step by step. Is that sort of?
Yeah, I would say it's really written for people who would consider themselves a leader or want to be a leader, but that doesn't mean that you're the CEO, right? Like you could be 2 years into your career and be a leader. You don't need to be in the ivory tower in order to lead. And so the book is really written with a mind to inspire people at any level to bring this into their understanding, their ability to understand themselves, their ability to understand the people around them, and ultimately lead themselves and lead the people around them as best as they can.
So to be a good leader, you learn these skills and you can lead whatever organization or whatever you're working on.
Exactly.
Just be a leader.
Yeah, you might be a high school coach for a sports team. You might be a teacher in in third grade. You might be the CEO of a multinational.
Okay, so when I read your book, and I just was really trying to understand kind of the essence, like what's the essence of this book, and it seemed to be sort of taking that concept of perspective taking and kind of working through a range of different perspectives that you can take. Like there's, I think in each chapter, there's exercises that people can do. So there's like taking the perspective of taking a problem, taking, 3 perspectives, on that problem. That's like chapter 1. Chapter 2 is you create like you have a series of archetypes or different personalities, and how would each of those archetypes take a look from their perspective on this problem. So you create these different kind of points of view to kind of look at problems. Is that?
Yeah, exactly right. And the archetypes are a great, to use a colloquial phrase, they're a great gateway drug to empathy, right? I think that they let people try on different things and see how taking an empathic view from different styles of empaths starts to feel. So, we have 7 archetypes. Are there more than 7? Possibly, right? I mean, when we did our work and started to think about the different ways one elicits understanding and gains perspective through empathy, the 7 we landed on seemed to be quite exhaustive. And my belief is, unlike a Myers-Briggs test or something like that, this is, we are all 7, just in varying degrees, right? So there are some people over-index in one aspect of the one archetype. Some may over-index in a couple, but we all probably have strengths or weaknesses, and it's helpful to understand those and work with that understanding to start to bolster the ones where you have a bit of a deficit. So, for example, one of the archetypes is the convener. And the convener's behavior is to host. They know how to hold space. They know how to create an environment where people feel comfortable, right? And in so doing, those people, when they come in, other people, when they come into that environment, are relaxed, are comfortable, or are energized, or whatever they need to feel, they're made to feel, because the convener knows how to set up the circumstances for them to be in that space. And in so doing, the convener gets information because people are comfortable and they're ready, as opposed to if they're uncomfortable or a little standoffish or something else. It's a way for them the convener to get someone comfortable dropping into a certain state so that they can gain understanding quickly. That's a skill that I have more so than some of the others. One of the other archetypes is the alchemist. The alchemist's behavior is to experiment and to kind of tweak the formula and to be a real scientific method style learner. And that's something that does not come as naturally for me. So that said, we have a client who is very much focused on being a alchemist-like culture, and their whole teams work in that way. And so for me, it's very important that if I'm going to work with that client, that I put myself into that perspective a bit more before going into a meeting, so that I can start to say, okay, if I was in their shoes and I wanted to see things in a more experimental, test and learn, prototype-y sort of way, how would I present this information? How would I talk them through the next hour to make sure we get the most out of our time? And so it's just a way to start to, like we said earlier, flex different muscles and learn how to work in different ways.
Yeah, I thought that was I kind of a light bulb went off, because I'd seen in sort of trainings where they have these sort of models. I guess it's Myers-Briggs type, where you have different personality types. And that's interesting, but I hadn't thought of what is each of those personality types' relation to empathy. So right. It was like, hey, and you're creating these archetypes. That was like that's an idea. It's like each of those has a different strength, a different area where they're good at being empathic, and what is that? So even to think in those terms was a bit of a light bulb experience.
That's great.
So, okay, let's see. So you had the archetypes. So you're taking these different perspectives. Then there's this perspective of a different self. So you're laying out like different selves. You know, there's this physical self, emotional self, inspired, community, mindful. So there's this sense of self, and then taking sort of like perspectives from these different sense of selves. And is that
Yes.
kind of
yeah? So that chapter is really focused on having empathy for yourself and understanding your interior world and what's going on there, so that you can start to understand how the world around you interacts with you. So, for example, one of the selves, the physical self, some people go through their whole day without ever once checking in on their breath, feeling their feet, right? They're basically just, they're in a meat suit that's moving their brain from one meeting to another, and they're just sort of the physical act of being is either oblivious or sort of lost on some people. So if that's how someone is acting or behaving or feeling, we want them to start to become more aware of their physical body, more aware of their breathing, more aware of whatever it is, their relationship to the world around them physically. As you move up, we get into more esoteric aspects of the self. We start to get into things like the community self or the mindful or aspirational. But taking the community as an example, one of the exercises we ask people to do is to think about who are the communities that you serve the most. That might be, you know, your colleagues, it might be your family, whatever it is. And what is it that they want from you, right? What is the thing you give them? And they take a few minutes and they write that down. And then we ask them to flip it and say, who are the communities that serve you? And what is it you want from them? And it's amazing how often those answers are not the same. That many times when I run a workshop and talk with people about this, the answer to who they serve and who serves them are completely different, but they've never thought about that. Then they've never really kind of picked at that dynamic in their life. And so when they do, they start to realize, wow, I really need to find a different way to work with the people around me, because it's only one directional.
So they're really taking those different perspectives and gaining that insight from those perspectives, and then able to work with those new insights.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of reminds me of one thing we do is something called empathy circles, where we do empathic listening with each other. So kind of active listening, you know, empathic listening. And one of these groups, you know, some kind of a issue came up with someone that had creativity, right? She would come up with creative ideas, and then she had this quality of judgment come up to her creativity and kind of beat down that creativity. And so she didn't even want to be creative because that her own self-judgment would come in. So what we did was sort of a perspective taking, like kind of internal perspective taking, where we did role plays of the different parts. Like I acted out her creativity, someone acted out the judgment, and then we had an empathic dialogue between the two components. So that seems to be kind of in the same, you know, general same vein of taking these different components inside yourself, different, and actually taking the perspective of those different ones and kind of having them sort of learn from them, or in our case, actually have them empathically dialogue with each other.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's you know, that ability to be self-observational at various altitudes of yourself is a really powerful gift. There's a study I was reading recently. It was in a recent issue of the New Yorker, that there is a research team in Germany that's using virtual reality to create these shifts like you've just described. So one example of the research is that that you put on the VR headset and you look around you and you're sitting in a therapist's office looking space, and in walks Sigmund Freud, and he sits down in front of you and asks you to tell him why you are here. And so you begin to explain why you're here to see a therapist. And after 3, 4, 5 minutes of talking, the people running the study press a button in the VR experience, and all of a sudden you shift and you are now in Freud's chair, looking at yourself, hearing yourself say the last 5 minutes of dialogue again. And then you are expected to counsel yourself And then after 5 minutes, it flips back, and then you go and you back and forth a couple times. And so you do basically like a half-hour therapy session with yourself. And they've said that the results have been astronomical.
Wow.
That the ability to use VR to just kind of shift your own perspective and to look at yourself from another view and to hear yourself from another view is actually giving people the kind of objectivity they lack, and helping them work through problems independently.
Wow, that's a really interesting story. That it's sort of the power of perspective taking, or the imagination, that we can really imagine ourselves. It's unlimited. That we can imagine ourselves in any. I can imagine myself being a rock, right? I can imagine myself being a carrot. What does the world look like from being a carrot? It's just like kids, right? Kids are out there. They're imagining all kinds of different role plays and just running around and kind of having their imagination kind of develop and strengthen. Yeah,
absolutely right. And I think that you said strengthen. I think that's the right word for it. It is really like we said about training the muscle. It's like the more you do that, the more comfortable you are doing that.
And that's really what you're doing, kind of chapter by chapter, is kind of adding other perspectives, to look from. So you have the next one, I think chapter 4 was, you call it the 4 tensions. So seeing from a top down and bottom up perspective, or from you'd use human-centered design or eco-design, which I guess is human-centered design you were seeing as more person-centered, focusing on the individual, and then ecosystem is more of the broader, holistic, cultural, ecosystemic environment, and then placing yourself along that continuum, sort of, and taking different perspectives.
Figuring out, the way I agree with what you were saying is, in each of those tensions, where do you calibrate yourself, right? It's not an on-off switch. It's not that we are a top-down or a bottom-up culture at 100 and 0, right? It's a slider. And so where on the slider do you sit in, if you take the example of someone working at a corporation, is your corporation a top-down or a bottom-up style organization? Because knowing that, you're going to know that the way to lead, the way to solve problems, the way to show up may require different things of you. If it's bottom-up, you may have to make extra efforts to elicit feedback from peers and to talk to people on your team who are at the more junior level more often, so that their voice is heard and that they become part of the overall solution you're building, or the culture you're developing, as opposed to if it's top down and it's real sort of command and control like environment. What is the best way to get your work out into the world? Is it through efficiency? Is it through clear communication? Is it through direct action steps? Whatever it is, right? You have to kind of calibrate on that spectrum and then figure out what's the best way for me to lead within this ecosystem that I work within.
Do you think that a top-down culture is very empathic? For me, it seems like it's sort of a low empathy. If we look at kind of authoritarian top-down countries, they tend to be, it's sort of suppression. You kind of go along with the program, or you get kind of suppressed in often violent ways.
I think that is not untrue, but there are definitely companies that run from a bit more of a top-down mentality and still feel inclusive, but they have done so by building a culture of feedback or collaboration that still allows them to run very, very directly. So, take, for example, General Electric. I wouldn't say General Electric is a very bottom-up company, right? They're very top-down. They have very senior leaders who've been in the business world for a long time. They have a clear perspective on what they want to do. But at the same time, they're big proponents of collaboration, of their engineering-led business, really. And so they're a big, if you go back to the alchemist archetype, they're a big test and learner, right? Their behavior of prototyping and building and tweaking and fixing and improving is as old as their founder, Edison, right? I mean, like the history of the business was designed in that way. And so while they run very efficiently and you could say more top down than bottom up, that isn't closed-minded of them, or something that feels like they are a bad place to work.
So there could be two aspects to that. One is the leadership could be empathic to the needs of the employees, kind of where they are, as well as it can be sort of a mixture of being empathic and unempathic in terms of listening. I mean, you could have a very top-down, no listening. You know, I mean, it's some brutal countries out there. You know, North Korea, for example.
Yeah. Which
would be, you know, we're talking serious top-down. You know, I mean, GE wouldn't be like strict top-down. It has a culture. It has space. You know, cultural space for innovation and creativity. So it's sort of a mixture of
like I said, it's not 100 or 0, right?
Yeah.
It's somewhere on the spectrum. But taking stock of that, so I haven't thought about this before, but just to kind of do it in conversation now, if you take the North Korea example instead, right? The point of this set of calibrations is to understand. So obviously North Korea is as close to 100 as one could probably be as a culture. That may inform how you, as making this up, a journalist in North Korea working for the state newspaper has to engage with the administration in order to do your job, right? Now, I don't know enough about North Korean journalism to tell you how that takes place or doesn't take place, but knowing where you sit on the spectrum is going to inform how you interact with the larger world around you.
So if you know to be aware that you're in a highly top-down environment, then you have to feel into that and then react accordingly. And that sense of awareness is going to be supportive for you.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, so that was looking at those polarizations. You're taking different polarizations and kind of placing yourself in there and taking those perspective. The other is connecting to your roots. So in a way, that's taking the perspective of your past, going into your past and taking the perspective of your past is sort of what I get there. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. So particularly, again, I mean, this book is very much written in the business landscape. So taking the Edison example I just mentioned, right? When GE behaves when GE behaves consistently with the values of its early found, when it is solving the world's problems at scale, when it's inventing, when it's being experimental, GE's stock is up, its employee retention is up, so on and so forth. But when GE tries to be a bank with GE Capital, or tries to be a real estate development firm with GE Real Estate, or things like that, which are not inherently as experimental, they're a bit more sort of financial market driven, the business has suffered. And so the lesson there for our clients at GE was, how do we keep a little of that Edisonian magic in our culture, 100 some odd years later, so that we're true to our roots, we're true to how we were founded, and we can use that as a tool for moving into the future.
Mm-hmm. So a bit of being aware of your story of self, your origin story, like who are we, and bring that into, and have that awareness and bring it into the present, so you can kind of have these roots.
Exactly. It's inevitable that things will change, that, you don't need to hold on to every single thing that's in the timeline, right? There are some mistakes every company has made, but there are some foundational principles that are often always true. We've worked with Johnson & Johnson for years, and when you go into Johnson & Johnson's headquarters, there's literally a enormous stone that's probably 8-9 feet tall, and engraved in it is the founder's credo for why they started Johnson & Johnson, and the commitment to care, and the commitment to providing people a sense of wellness. And I don't remember the words exactly, but if you read that, that is still a guiding principle today. And every employee who walks into headquarters walks past that credo every day. So it's a reminder to the organization as to the founder's dream for the company and what they want to still honor.
Mm. Well, families have that too with genealogy. It seems that you kind of check your genealogy, who are your ancestors, and it sort of influences. And, you know, growing up, you hear stories about your grandparents and what was important to them, and those stories come forward too, and kind of become sort of a touchstone.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, interestingly, I've been just anecdotally hearing from a lot of friends who have started doing the 23andMe or Ancestry.com genetic testing to kind of learn more about their actual history. So I'd done it years ago. And, you know, when I grew up thinking I was half Italian, quarter Irish, and quarter Polish, because that's what my parents told me, because that's what they were, and that's what their parents told them. And then I did the test and found that I was like 15 things. Right. And so all of a sudden my roots, my perspective on me and my roots and my ancestry completely changed.
Yeah, yes, it's like you change the story, you change your sense of self in a sense there. And it's like a whole different perspective on yourself. And there's going to be different feelings coming up around those. For me, it was, I remember, you know, my family is German, and they were in the eastern part of Germany, you know, or actually, and in Poland. And so they told stories, you know, they were religious, you know, Christian. And then there was the persecution of the Jews, and they would tell stories of, you know, trying to help people as they could. So it's sort of like part of the cultural story was, you know, we kind of reach out to everybody, you know, we don't, you know, it's like they tried to be, you know, helpful to the Poles who were in, and then they told how when, you know, the Russians came in and, you know, the tables were turned, it's people remembered that those, that kindness that was done to them and kind of reciprocated. And so those were, you know, kind of like personal stories that I kind of recall.
Yeah. And those have likely shaped in some way that what you have grown into.
Exactly. Yeah, I think this whole interest in empathy is from hearing kind of that lack of empathy during that time. You know, the people who got killed and raped and just the kind of the horrors of it. And that empathy is really kind of the, you know, if that's what it was a huge empathy deficit. And, you know, fostering these values of empathy is what would have kind of solved those, addressed those kind of issues. So, yeah. Okay, then let's see, the next one was chapter 6. It's sort of envisioning your future, which is in a sense, again, perspective taking is imagining, I would take it as imagining yourself in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Really starting to map forward, where is it that you want to be? What are the steps you need to take in order to get there? How can you lead people into that place together so that you're not going there alone? So on and so forth.
Yeah. So I think something that people don't realize in terms of this imaginative empathy, when we think about the future, in a sense, we empathize with ourselves in a future state. And so that's really, again, you know, that's like the importance of empathy, is that we're using it all the time to imagine ourselves in these different scenarios. So, for example, I imagine myself having this interview with you, right? So I'm kind of like preparing, I'm kind of like imagining what will be the steps of it. So I'm sort of like preparing myself by imagining myself, you know, preparing for this. And we do it all the time. I don't think it's so, people aren't as aware that this is a kind of imaginative empathy that we're going to. We're feeling into that future situation and imagining what the feelings would be like and sort of trying to choreograph that felt experience.
Yeah, and I think it's, when we think about empathy, we often think about it for another person, right? Or sometimes we think about it for ourselves, but we rarely think about it for a point on the timeline, right? Like what will, but you can empathize with that, because when you think about, okay, how, like we had a luxury client that came to us recently and said, we have a very successful, very big flagship store in uptown Manhattan that has been, part of our history for over 100 years. And we want you to undertake assignment to help us imagine what that store should be like and how it should function in 2030. Right? So that we had to have empathy for a lot of different things, thinking that far into the future. We had to think about, how will people want to shop? How will people want to shop for expensive jewelry and luxury items? How will the retail landscape have changed? How will New York City have changed? How will, everything, right? And so we had to really take a wide cross section of perspectives to really future cast into 2030 and then present back thinking.
So there you are. It's like a company has to think of where they're going to be in the future and empathize with themselves as a whole entity, and then have that whole systemic kind of empathy of the whole culture that they're going to be in.
Exactly right.
Okay, and then chapter 7, you have ritualizing empathy, and so my understanding of that is sort of taking all these steps of these perspective-taking steps that you've laid out here and making it a ritual, an ongoing practice to take this empathic, to practice, to exercise this perspective-taking, this empathic perspective-taking, make it a ritual so you kind of do it on an ongoing, regular basis. Is that?
Yeah, and for everyone who reads the book, there will be different things that they latch onto, right? I don't imagine everyone will read the book and say, I'm going to go do all of these things, right? They're going to read it and say, this really speaks to me. I'd like to find a way to work that into my daily life, into the way I run my team or whatever it might be. And so figuring out how to make a ritual out of those things and make them repeatable and part of the process or the culture that your organization goes through, or that your family goes through, or that your classroom goes through, or whatever it is, it will help to start to make it more accessible.
Yeah. So that kind of encapsulates the book. Is there more you want to add to kind of round out the book?
No, I think that, that is the arc that the book takes for sure. And I think for me, it's what I tried to do in putting it together was find the different steps along the journey that we went through as an organization and where we found value applying empathy to our business as it grew, our clients as we grew with them, and our team. So it's that's the arc of the book for sure.
Was there any kind of an aha moment where you said, hey, empathy is really the center, empathy is this important thing? Was it like an aha moment, or did it kind of just happen slowly, or how did that come about?
Bit of both, actually. I would say it was a slow boil that then became kind of like an aha. So we very intentionally set out about 5 years ago to figure out where our sort of core skill was, what our core skill was as an organization. Because yes, we're good designers, and yes, we're good strategists, and yes, we can solve problems, but why are we good designers? Why are we good strategists? Why do we solve problems? And so we started to really pick at some of our best cases over the past decade of work, and saw what started to emerge was that when we were at our most empathic, when we were really making efforts to gain a variety of perspective and to truly understand the problem from a variety of different points of view, we were actually doing our best work. And so that exercise was months long to really go back over the work and pick at it and figure out what was actually under the hood. But once we figured out what it was abundantly clear that was, now we're committing to this, and we'll build a way that'll help lead us in this.
Do you remember when even the term empathy came up? Has it always been sort of a term? Because in human-centered design, it's always it's part of the design process. So it's sort of in the culture, it's talked about.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how it came about, or is there like did the source come from somewhere else? Or
No, I think you're right. It was, it was human-centered design has empathy as a core pillar. When we think about the work we do, human-centered design is, the human is a major leg on the table, but it is not the whole table, right? That's why, I think our organization on that spectrum of human-centered versus ecosystemic, we lean a little more ecosystemic, which includes human, but also includes the world around us and the culture of the internal team, as well as not just the end consumer, all of these other component parts that we have to think about in order to build a well-rounded solution.
Yeah, when I saw that spectrum, I really resonated with that, because I've been talking about a culture of empathy, which I would say is sort of the what you're calling ecosystemic, is you're thinking of the whole of the system. So there's a perspective of the whole as well. It's not just my perspective of me, kind of out there, kind of towards the world, or focusing on one person and their perspective and addressing their needs. It's that we want to hold the needs of all the individuals and their perspective, as well as that whole cultural space, because there is a felt experience with that cultural space. You walk into a room and there's a culture there, right? There's a felt experience. You can feel it being open, or you can feel very cliquish. So a group has a sort of a group felt experience, just like the whole culture has that group felt experience.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. So, okay, then the other part is, maybe I can get some kind of ideas around this for the last 15 minutes that we have. Is, we're working on building a culture of empathy, and what we want to work on is an online empathy MOOC. So an empathy, we're putting together some teams to design an online training. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about, yours is a little bit of a MOOC, and in a sense, but what do you think about that, like online empathy training, and kind of ideas about how to create that effectively, and let's co-design a little bit here. Around.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think the more training we can get, the better we'll all be. The better empaths we'll all be. I think for us, so we've taught a class at university level for a few semesters around this work, and I would say that in the introduction of empathy, one of the most important things we've had to break people's sort of preconceived notions or behaviors was the comfort in the discomfort of empathy sometimes, right? And understanding that this is going to be subjective work more so than objective work. And so finding exercises that we could do early on to put people into a state of comfort in subjectivity, of multiple right answers, is really a valuable early step that I would think that any sort of online curriculum should try to achieve, so that people can start to understand that there's no perfect right answer and wrong answer. There's multiple answers. There's shades of gray, and building a comfort in that ambiguity is one of the first steps of building a comfort with empathy.
Okay, so when people first start with dealing with subjectivity, they might feel some anxiety about it. Like, they're used to having kind of fixed answers and wanting that fixed clarity. And when you're going in with empathy, you're kind of going into a quality of ambiguity, and that ambiguity can be kind of scary, or like, how do I deal with this? I don't want ambiguity. It's like, and then it's like creating an introduction and saying, hey, ambiguity is okay. Here's how you can expect this ambiguity. It's okay. And kind of being able to address, kind of speak to and ease people into, participants into dealing with that ambiguity is kind of what I'm
hearing. Exactly right.
There. And overcome those fears that they're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you do that? How did you overcome ambiguity?
So one of the early exercises we had the students do was go to the town square a couple blocks from campus, and they go out as groups of two, And we tell them, observe the town square, the shops, the way people park their cars, the way people move around, the types of people that are there, all of that sort of stuff. And then come back to class and share with us an idea, an observation that has led you to a potential solution for how to improve the way the town square functions. And so they all go out and they all do it, and they all come back and they all observe the same things. They all come back and say, oh, well, there's not enough parking, and there's not enough diversity in the food choices. And then they look around the room and they look at each other and they're like, oh, I thought I was unique in seeing that perspective. But turns out we all just went and did that from the perspective of a college kid. And we all did that from the perspective of, what do college students want? Well, they want the convenience of being able to park their car and run in and get what they need and come out. And they'd like more food options. So apparently those are two things college kids care about. But what they didn't do was go there and say, well, what if I was this elderly couple walking down the street, and how would I offer a solution if I was them? Or what if I was this mom of 3 kids pushing a stroller and holding 2 kids' hands and carrying a grocery bag? And what would I do if I was in her shoes? And so on and so forth. So then we send them back out and say, okay, now fix in on someone you're observing and try to think about it from their perspective and what would they want. And then they come back and they all have different answers. And they realize very quickly early on that the broader you get your perspective and the more points of view you consider in the design of a solution, the more well-rounded it will be.
Mm-hmm. And in that scenario, where would be the ambiguity? Where do you sense, like you're just sending people out on this assignment, are they feeling ambiguous, or where would ambiguity be in that snenario?
Well, yeah, I think that they don't know what they're looking for. So there's this anxiety of like, I don't know how to do this.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
I'm going to just revert to what I think.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And then when they come back and realize that that is not the way you solve problems, then they get comfortable in the fact that it's always going to be ambiguous. And the more perspectives I take, the less ambiguous it will get.
I see. And then you also have sort of a methodology for taking those perspectives. It's like, hey, I've got a path here through this ambiguity, which is I take multiple perspectives and there's sort of an emergent, something will emerge.
Exactly.
Some insights will emerge from these different perspectives. And yeah. That's right. So one of the kind of perspectives we've come from is the sort of the Carl Rogers, if you're familiar with Carl Rogers and his empathic listening that he did. So this is coming from sort of the psychology, it's like, empathy is kind of core to the therapeutic methodology. And there's a lot about listening and, doing reflective listening and kind of the levels of listening, listening for people's stories, listening to their felt experience, kind of going behind the stories, behind the feelings. Like if somebody's really, kind of angry, you just stay and you listen to it and you hear what's sort of behind the anger. And you start sort of peeling the onion away to get down to the core, maybe needs that this person has of why they're angry. They're angry because they're not feeling secure, or they feel violated, or, what is it that they're needing? Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly, I would agree. Totally. Yeah. It's that training that behavior starts to make it more second nature for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of in terms of methodology, kind of a big, piece of we're trying to teach that. There's a new book out, Listening Well, which is by a guy named Michael, it's Miller, William Miller. So it's really about how to do this empathic listening, how to listen deeply, how to become aware of the blocks to empathy. For example, if I'm listening to you and I start going off on a different tangent or detaching or start sympathizing with you, feeling sorry for you, or starting to try to judge or put down, then I'm kind of like blocking that empathic connection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the ability to listen is such a critical input to empathy. You know, one of the things I talk about in the archetypes, one of the archetypes is built around listening, and the tendency a lot of people have, particularly in the corporate world, is planning what they want to say while someone else is talking, not genuinely listening. Mm-hmm. And so really heightening your own self-awareness for that, and noticing when, oh man, I'm not listening, I'm looking at this person, but I'm actually just having a dialogue in my head about what I want to say when they take a breath, and I can jump in and say it. And then getting people to learn how to stop that inner monologue and really do as you've just described and listen deeply. That's when real connection starts.
Okay. Then, well, we've kind of covered your book, you know, the outline of the books. We've gone into a bit of, you know, how do we create some empathy training and some ideas. Is there anything in the last, you know, 8 minutes, 6, 7 minutes that we have that you want to talk about, or some topic of interest?
I mean, I think we've definitely covered a good cross section. I think the last thing I'll say is, in working with this style of leadership, it is often going to be more uncomfortable than comfortable in the beginning, and having some way of sort of inspiring yourself to do it, or finding the bravery in doing it, is critical, because it may not pay immediate dividends, right? You may have to do this for a little while before it clicks, or before you get that aha moment, or that perspective really informs something you're going to do. So it's not a quick fix necessarily. For some people it might be, but I would just put an encouragement out there to say, don't give up on it if it feels hard. Just keep working into it, and eventually it will start to open up.
Well, what about having a group to be working with? Because we do something like mentioned called empathy circles. So we bring people together to dialogue about these, you know, whatever is coming up for you. So it's a sense of having a group to be able to share the difficulties with, so you're not by yourself. Yeah. And kind of have that alienation or loneliness with the struggles, and having an empathic support group to kind of listen to each other and to share those, you know, difficult experiences, which, you know, can be very healing or motivating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having any sort of feedback loop that you can create, whether that's with the people you work with and who are also trying to do it, or if it's just a, you know, objective third party that you can sit down and have a conversation with, all of those are valuable.
Oh, something that just came to mind is, where do you think this is going for you now with your empathy work? Like, where do you personally see your, you know, your creative edge for kind of moving deeper into this and learning and growing?
Yeah, I think you said it in learning. Right now, I think the most important thing for me and for Sub Rosa at large is to see how, you know, we've been in the gestation period of this for a while. Obviously, we've been doing it for our clients, but this is the first time that the book is going to be out in the world. And so really our intent in the near term is to just listen and to learn and to see how it lands and to improve it, because, you know, it is a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, you're putting this book out there, you kind of see what the reaction is, and then you just it's like another factory. You kind of grow and build off of what you discover from
exactly right
that book. And you don't know exactly where it's going to go. There's sort of an ambiguity there in terms of where's it going to go? What's the reaction going to be? What problems are we going to need to address in the future? Well, I hope we can stay in contact, because it's, you know, we're trying to build a culture of empathy. You know, we've been trying to get into the political world. We just did an empathy circle with local politicians, you know, had them actually do empathic listening together. A couple of weeks ago, we met with our congressman here in the district I'm in, about him doing an empathy circle. And we want to do empathy circle dialogues, you know, with congressional representatives, because we have a real, you know, we got a real problems in the country that I think that, you know, we need kind of empathy to scale up to the governmental level. So, you know, we're kind of working at that level, and we'd love to, you know, keep in contact and, you know, see if there's any collaboration or overlap or what have you.
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay. Well, Michael, thank you very much. The
Thank
book,
you. Really appreciate
again, is Applied Empathy, the New Language of Leadership.